Like a
Braving the bear.
Yeah, really. Let's see. Oh, I thought that might happen. So I'm recording this this session, my talk, and of course, when you know it, what it goes to is on my screen. I'm seeing the presenter screen, which I like because it shows me what's coming next, and that'll help me transition better. But it may not be as good for what the recording part as far as that's concerned. So anyway, so some people said they couldn't be here tonight, but they wanted to catch it, and so I said, well, I've got an easy way to get this out on the internet. It can be shared with anybody. So anyway, so look, a couple of things as we get started. You've asked a person who is a teacher to give the talk tonight, and so that's sort of my mindset all the time. Is I'm a teacher, so I will talk about. I'm less interested personally in what the quality of the images at this point, but more interested in sharing kind of what I've learned over the past 4 years, because I got interested in doing astrophotography primarily by observing the beautiful images on Astronomy Photo of the Day, also known as APOD. So things like this just really captivated me. This picture was by a brilliant astrophotographer with the Milky Way over some mountains. I was like, oh, this is what I want to do. I just really got interested in that. And and I'm not trying to ram this down anybody's throat, but I will say that and I know many of you probably fall in the same category as well, but others don't. Take it for what it's worth. I do this primarily as a way to give glory to my Creator. With whom that's the most important part of my life. So that I wanted to show that, and I wanted to make sure to mention that. I got fascinated by this by watching Astronomy Photo of the Day, kind of looking at their pictures. They have a lot of other kinds of content on their website that I am less interested in personally, or haven't explored as much. I shouldn't say that I'm less interested, but haven't explored as much. They have a lot of like astronomy science stuff from NASA and the European Space Agency. And they have a lot of images like this, which could be taken by telescopes, but with these like CCD cameras, and it doesn't, it's like deep sky images and the nebulae, and they're so beautiful. But I haven't explored that yet. I have been more interested in getting what I call a sense of the place. Okay, I want to show the viewer a sense of this is what the sky was doing over this beautiful area, and we live in a very beautiful area. So I'm blessed to be to live in such a wonderful place that has so much nice landscape to include with the stars. And so that's primarily what I've been doing. So as I got started, I got my first DSLR camera. It was a Nikon D5200, and with the kit lens. And I went out to my very first venture out to Clover Creek Preserve, which is right across the house, or right across the street from my house. And of course, that's here in Redding still. And so I was so excited that I got my first picture of the Milky Way. And so you can kind of barely see. This was in July of 4 years ago. I got my first Milky Way shot, and I was very excited. So this was the post that I included with it. A monster is born. Here are my first shots. And kind of prophetically, I think one of my friends commented under that, said, oh, how wonderful, Trent. Keep at it. Just I look forward to seeing how you'll improve over time. And I really feel like that I have been improving and still have a long way to go. But so by the way, I don't feel like I'm probably not even the best astrophotographer in the room or in our group. But I will say probably I very likely am, of all the people in the group, as far as I can tell, the one who spends the highest percentage of his time, of his photographic time, doing astro stuff, because that's really what I'm most fascinated by. So I went out and I did a lot of astro and learned from here. So what I want to do, talk briefly about what I use for my astrophotography. Again, I'm a teacher, so I want to give some general ideas about astrophotography, and I'll include some of my images along the way that kind of highlight some of the pitfalls or possible workarounds for some things you may be dealing with in astrophotography. And then I'll progress into 4 different types of categories of astrophotography. One would be basically still shots, or quote unquote still shots showing just stars in general. And then still, quote unquote, still shots showing the Milky Way, and then star trails, and then special events in astrophotography. So that's what I'm going to be going for today. So as far as what I use, over these 4 years, I've used a few different cameras. I started out with a Nikon D5200. Progressed within a year. I really wanted a little bit lower noise, better low light performance, but I was still not ready to make the jump as far as financially up to full frame. So I got traded that in for a Nikon D7200 and used that for most of the shots you'll see today or this evening were taken with the D7200. For a brief time, as you can tell, very brief time last year around the solar eclipse, I also got a camera that's sort of in between. It's like a compact camera. It's not got interchangeable lenses, but had a lot of controls, and I could do a lot of different things with it that I used. And then now I'm taking most of my shots recently with the D5200. I still actually have the D7200. I haven't gotten rid of it yet, but I'm trying to. Yeah, we do have a swap meet coming up. Maybe I'll bring it to them. As far as lenses are concerned, I started out with the kit lens. Pretty quickly bought a prime 35mm, which I love as well. It's really great for on that camera, very sharp, and gives good background blur for other things. Also can be very sharp for astrophotography if you stop it down just a little bit and get the focus. You have to nail the focus, and it's incredibly challenging. A lot of the shots you'll see, my workhorse for astrophotography is this lens here, the Tokina 11-16. f2.8, which is very good and sharp for astrophotography. It's very, very wonderful. As far as many of my other shots, especially if I zoomed in a little bit more throughout my life or throughout my time of doing this, were taken with the Tamron 18-270 because that has been my general standard walking around lens because it's a kind of all-in-one. It goes for such an incredible range. I did kind of lose my mind a little bit and buy this really kind of a cheap 500mm, but I hardly used it much at all. But recently I got a better telephoto lens, the Tamron 150-600, and the lens I'm using now for walking around mostly is this one. Other equipment that's important to me is a sturdy tripod. You need a good sturdy tripod for this. I found that out recently. Things shaky. I was trying to photograph the fire, and I had my shakier tripod, and it didn't work very well. You can, although I don't use it very much right now, you can get. It's really helpful to have a ball head camera mount. That way, like on the tripods that I have, if you try to tilt the camera to vertical, take a vertical shot, it often doesn't work very well unless you have a good kind of an adapter head, like a ball head one, and those can be really helpful. I don't typically bring those out with me anymore, but that's to my own detriment because they're very handy. The number one piece of equipment, apart from the camera and the lens, and of course the tripod, which you kind of already have, that you'll need to, that I think is really critical for doing astrophotography, is an intervalometer like this one. I have it up here if anybody wants it. They're cheap, that 20 bucks or something like that. They do run on batteries, but the batteries last half of forever. Very nice. This is great for having long exposures, repeating over and over again with short intervals between. It's also great just to trigger the camera, even if you're not using this to set the time of how long the shots are going to be. It's great just to push this button, and it avoids you having to push the camera, so that it avoids shake as well. So this is very handy in a lot of ways. You want to bring a light source with you because this is a nighttime sport. So a headlamp is good. And then I actually got a Vixen Polaris star tracker for not as good for like landscape astrophotography, but if you really wanted to get into like taking shots of the sky for kind of a longer time, like for example comets and stuff like that, it'd be great to use that. I haven't explored it too much. I bought it, but my first attempt to use it didn't work out very well. So I just haven't gotten it back out, but I do have one of those, and they can be kind of handy. Okay, I'll move on. Okay, so when it comes to general considerations, general things about astrophotography, you know, talk about some things you want to watch out for, and be sure you have or not have. Okay, so first consideration, this was also taken that same first night I had my camera, got out and took a picture from my house looking toward the Big Dipper in July. You can tell the Big Dipper still is there, but that's shooting toward Redding. So you want to be sure, you know, that you get away from light pollution is really handy. Although light pollution in the right dosages can really be helpful in an astrophoto as well. If you're shooting toward a city that's way off, it can kind of provide a neat little spot in that picture. Sometimes you don't want dark skies, so sometimes you can, this is not astrophoto, but sometimes light pollution is kind of a cool thing to play around with, and if you're in a city and stuff. So that was kind of, yeah. All of these I'm going to show tonight. If it shows like this information up here, it's a picture that I took. San Francisco. That's I've shot from Oakland, looking across the bay towards San Francisco. This is from like by the airport, so like on the same peninsula where the airport is. Took that picture. Again, not an astrophoto, but it'll be fun. If you want to find a good dark sky, you can go to darkskyfinder.com. What you see is that if you're in the eastern half of the country, you're pretty much out of luck. I mean, you really are not going to have a much tougher time. But as you notice over here where we are, here's Redding. Where, you know, you don't have to drive very far at all to get to where there's a dark sky. So if you're ever exploring a new place and you want to go find where the dark sky is around you, then darkskyfinder.com is a great place. So here's a zoomed in on, here's Redding. Lassen would be over here. Mount Shasta is up here, but really these are not bad skies either. So you can tell it doesn't take very far driving before you get to some good dark skies around here. Any questions so far? I mean, obviously not. So another consideration as far as dark skies that's very dominates your thought if you're an astrophotographer is what phase is the moon in? I swear ever since I started doing this, if you ask me at any moment what phase is the moon in, I can tell you because I always have that in the back of my mind. What phase is the moon in? Can I shoot tonight? If I got an opportunity, if the kids went to bed early and the clouds parted, is there an opportunity for me to go shoot tonight? And I need to know what phase is the moon in for that. So moon shots can be fun. If this was a normal month, this is what I would be thinking about this month. So for example, we're right here, which means that we're getting pretty close to a new moon, if you notice, which means that that's pure, like shooting purely for stars. Milky Way, if you're into that sort of thing, is kind of boring for me. This is not a normal month for a couple of reasons. Number one, here in Redding, we can't shoot very freely because of the fires, right, and the smoke. So that's not, but you don't have to drive too far, really, to get enough out of the smoke. I've heard Lassen's pretty clear. Yeah, you can get up out of the smoke at Lassen, which you'd want to do anyway to get out of the light pollution of Redding. The other thing about this not being a normal month is that this time of new moon, wonderfully, is the peak of the Perseid meteor shower. So if you like shooting meteors, then this is going to be something that you might want to do. But for me, really, the key time to shoot, because of what I'm interested in, is this time that's highlighted in blue, especially if I go out at early evening to, kind of midnight-ish, right around first quarter, which you'll notice my brand, my little logo on my pictures, a lot of them says first quarter photography. It's because I like to take pictures by the light of a first quarter moon, facing essentially east, but really you can be facing anywhere from north all the way to southeast, and you're good at that time of month, around first quarter moon in the evening. After about midnight or so, depending on where you are in this time frame, the moon is going to set, and then you're back to having really dark skies, but no way to light up the landscape. Once we get out of this blue area, now you're getting into the moon's getting fuller and fuller and probably blowing out the sky. Not a lot of good shooting in this range of the month. But then as you get toward full moon, the day before full moon, around this time of year, would be good if you want to try to catch the moon setting in the morning, because the moon is going to be setting about the same time the sun is going to rise. Okay, if you want a full moon shot, obviously you're going to want to do that on the day of the full moon, although really these couple of days either side of full moon, you're not going to be able to tell that the moon isn't full. It's going to be pretty darn close to 100% illuminated. Again, the day after a full moon, you might want to think about about catching a moon rise. Day or two after the full moon, you might want to catch the moon rise at night, because there will be enough. If you time it just right and everything's good, it's possible that you could get just the right amount of light on the mountains around us, but the moon coming up at that amount of time and everything's like really well exposed together. It's not always easy to do that. And then the last phase of the moon that I'll talk about, again, this phase in here is kind of boring to me because the moon's really bright, kind of blowing out the sky. But as you get closer to last quarter moon, then if you wanted to, although I haven't done this as much, get up in the middle of the night and go drive somewhere, then you can have the last quarter moon illuminating your shots looking west, or really anywhere from north to southwest. Are we good? So,
do you like that tells you where the setting?
Great question. The best, excellent question. That was the very next thing I was going to tell you. Timeanddate.com is your resource for where is the moon, when is it going to rise, and what direction is it going to rise? Like 90 degrees, is it rising 90 degrees or 120 degrees, or where? So you can plan on where. Now you can tell this is not a live screenshot because obviously the moon is not 89% illuminated right now. We're in a waning crescent right now, and that's not. But this is a picture, a screenshot that I took.
Is it just moon?
You can do sun and everything. If you notice here, sun and moon tabs. Timeanddate.com is pretty cool, but sun and moon are probably the most important, the most helpful ones for astrophotography. Yeah.
You used to photo those?
I've heard of that, and yeah. So there's apps as well. Yeah, absolutely. So she's talking about photo pills. I've heard of it, and I may have tried or kind of looked into it, but to me, the main resource that I use, Time and Date.
A couple of good ones are, one is Stellarium.
Oh yeah.
Which will give you the whole, all the stars, everything, planets, the whole bit. And then there's phases of the moon. And both of those are free. So
I generally avoid taking pictures during full moon time, really, except for fun times like this when you got moonrise happening and they're about sunset, and so you can do stuff like this. Was in Colorado. I was at the Rocky Mountain National Park. This is probably my most liked photo ever on Facebook. Was this one? Was the moon setting while the sun was rising? Of just here in Redding. I took that picture from Sinorama's parking lot with my and it should say Samyang 500 millimeter, but with this cheap telephoto lens that I got. That but did a good enough job to zoom in on that. Anyway, that's a fun one. Then you want this. Obviously, what you would want depends on exactly where you are. But I like this one because it looks like the moon could be like a ball rolling along the hills there. And it's just I caught it at one moment of that. But there's all sorts of as the moon is setting, and you could even do like some of the coolest videos I've ever seen. This guy named Mark G, who's an amazing astrophotographer, and he took one of the moon rising. And there's people kind of dancing in the moon. It's just amazing. Anyway, this was the moon setting. So you can. I generally don't do much shooting when it's full moon, except for this kind of thing. If I think, the moon's going to be setting right as the sun's rising, that's what I want to get. Okay. So another thing you want to watch out for is clouds can really ruin your day. So I tried to go out and shoot at Clover Creek and get some reflections in the little ponds at Clover Creek, but the clouds were in my way, and it just really didn't do great for me. Another one, I tried to get out and do some photography from the east side, shooting from the northeast side of Mount Lassen. And boy, this would have just been amazing if those clouds hadn't been there, because I swear to you, like this over here is like, oh, it's like that constellation. Gosh, I can't remember the name of it right now. That tells you that the Milky Way is there. So I mean, I would have had the central band of the Milky Way right here. It just would have been wonderful, but the clouds were there. So.
So what time of day was that?
This is night. This is nighttime. Obviously, it's just the moon is providing the light. So the moon would have been over in this, well, off the screen, obviously, but to the left of this picture, lighting up the landscape.
20
Yeah, 20-second exposure. Yeah. So that's why I like to shoot with a little bit of a moon, to light up the landscape and give me some, to let the viewer see what the land is like. Another one, this was when I was in the Sierras, just this last year. You got Orion here. It was kind of in June. Is it June? No, it can't be June. This is wrong. This is supposed to be no, it should be March. I don't know why this says June. It was March of 2018. I was down in the Sierras at Lone Pine. And this is, I'm taking this picture from the Alabama Hills. Yeah, exactly. Taking it from Alabama Hills. Yeah. Yeah, but the clouds were kind of bumming me out, getting in my way. So what are you going to do? Now, so as we get a little bit fewer clouds, then you can start to get some more interesting things. I like this picture because you have the this meteor that reflected in the lake down here, which I really like. So I enjoyed that picture. And I wanted to show you this because not just this picture, but I took that picture and then I edited it again. I don't know, it shows up different on the screen, I think. It kind of blew it out on the screen. But as I was preparing for this talk, I realized, oh, my editing skills have changed and gotten better since I started doing this. And so you see kind of it's like more flat and maybe not as interesting. Again, on the screen, on this projected there, maybe it doesn't look quite as good as it did otherwise. But so it doesn't hurt every now and again to take some of your old pictures that you took before, and you might want to re-edit them every now and again to see if you've got, especially if your skills change or whatever. Here's a little bit clouds again, kind of, but not too many, so you can still tell the Milky Way here and Mount Shasta. This again was with the moon giving me a little bit of light on that. But unfortunately, the cloud right there, kind of right in the middle of the Milky Way, not my favorite.
I kind of like it.
Oh,
it gives it depth.
That's Mount Shasta City.
I like this.
This is taken from kind of north of Weed. So on 97, I was just off 97. No, not at the rest. I'll show you one from there.
Oh.
But this is just like between Weed and that viewpoint rest area. This was the furthest, that's like the most of the Milky Way I've ever gotten, I think, in any shot. Okay, this was taken from Grenada. So when I say the most of the Milky Way, that means I was the furthest south. So normally my view of the Milky Way cuts off right about here, but I get all this rest of it that I don't normally get because I was at 10 degrees, roughly 10 degrees latitude. So that I like that for showing me more of the Milky Way than I normally can see. And so this was at the very end, a very tip end of the island of Grenada, down there. Oh, and this was, it's like a panorama. I like stacked or aligned some different images that I took, put them together, and made a composite.
I was thinking
that's why the edges. I should have taken a few more images if I wanted a really good square one that included all of it.
That looks like you're standing up under like a, what do you call it? Yeah. Right.
Well,
covered patio with an arch and somebody's on.
Oh yeah. Well, no, I can see why somebody would think that, but what this really is a matter of that I didn't take enough pictures to get a good square that had the whole Milky Way. So anyway, so that's why it's got some missing corners up there.
Under a casitas arch. Right? Yep. Just sounds like yeah.
Now, I'm still telling you about kind of general considerations in clouds. So this one had a few clouds, but they were out of the way, so that's not so bad. The other thing about clouds is if you're going to do star trails photography, a lot of times the clouds don't bother that too much. So remember that shot I showed you earlier of the one sort of still image where the clouds were kind of, from this vantage point, where the clouds were kind of bugging things out. Well, but if you do it for star trails, it actually can still work. And so that's one possibility that you might want to, you know, if you got like light clouds, don't let them completely bum you out, because sometimes you can still get a decent shot. This also had some clouds involved. This was taken from the Bay Bridge, or from Bridge Bay Marina. And so there's clouds through here. And what you notice, I don't know if you can see this very well, but notice right through here at these star trails, that there's little breaks in them. That's what the stars do. Sorry, what the clouds do to your star trails photography is they put little gaps in your trails. Isn't too bad. And this was I like this picture for the part down here better, but the star trail's not as good. So if I wish I could have like the star trails from the other picture with the bridge. Yeah, they were taken at different angles and everything, so it wouldn't really work. Another strong consideration for astrophotography is your focus. Obviously, this picture is not in good focus, so yeah, not very good. Oh, this is a fun one. Okay, so quiz time. Which of these images was taken with the lens focused at about 2 meters, and which was on the dial? This lens that my Tokina. And which of them was taken with it set to infinity?
I think infinity's on the right.
I think infinity is over here,
That's my guess.
and this was the one at 2 meters.
That's what I think.
You know,
You'd think that.
you'd
but
think
it's a
that,
trick.
wouldn't you?
Yeah.
This was a trap because,
Yeah.
in fact, this lens, this Tokina lens, was actually, I think what it is it was designed for crop sensor cameras, and so it actually works. I was blown away and so grateful that this lens actually works on my full frame camera, but now the markings aren't on because this is the one that was set with it at infinity, and this one over here was focused at 2 meters. But so what I did is I went to live view. I switched my camera to live view mode, and then zoomed in and focused on a bright star, and then manual focused it until the point where it was like really tight dot, the tight as I could get it. And that's the focus I left it on for taking those pictures. And that is what gave the sharp focused picture over there on the right. The one on the left is out of focus, but even though the lens was supposedly in focus. So basically what this means is you can't always trust the markings, even if your lens has markings, you can't always trust it. If you want to know that you got it in focus, go to live view, zoom in on a bright star and focus it down to as tight of a dot as you can get it, then you're going to be in focus. There are systems where this guy, and I forget, I could post a link to it to the Facebook. There's a system for getting it absolutely as crisp focus, and it relies on this kind of filter that you put in the front of the lens, and it puts a crosshairs on it and stuff. I've never bothered with that, but if you want it absolutely as tight a focus as you can get at infinity, true, the stars, then that's what you'd use.
You say that was you had a full frame?
Yeah, I'm shooting this on my D750, the full frame camera, with a lens that is actually designed for a crop sensor camera.
I have the same lens, and I have a full frame, and it is a crop lens itself, and it'll actually crop it down because I had it set that.
Right, I get that, but mine, I didn't have it set that way, and I looked, and it's got the full resolution, 6,000 by 4,000 pixels, and I was blown away that it was still in FX mode with that lens on there, and it worked, and I was so grateful because I love that lens, and I didn't want to give it up.
Yeah, it's real sharp.
Yeah. Okay, the surprise general consideration is wildlife. So I was out taking pictures with my dad up in the Sierras. So this is at the campground that I stay at when I go up near Lake Tahoe. So I was taking this picture, and it was great. And I even got one where it reflected off the lake. And about that time, we hear some crashing in the undergrowth along the the trail behind us. And I said, well, boy, if some kid was running down the trail, they're going to get hurt. They can't run that fast. And my dad said, no, I think it's a dog. And then I said, no, I think it's a bear. And so this is the best picture I was able to get of the bear because there's a 2-second exposure and bears don't stay still for 2 seconds. Yeah, that was I switched out to my 35 millimeter lens, the prime 35 millimeter.
You had your flash.
No, well, I can't outrun a bear. And besides which, this is a black bear. I know it's brown in color, but it's a black bear. And so he's set up there on that stump. No, my dad was holding a flashlight on it. I didn't use the camera's flash. That was my dad holding the flashlight on it. My dad and I were down there together doing this. And we didn't have bear spray. No, he was just happy to sit up on that stump and munch whatever garbage he'd collected. And he sat there for about 15 minutes. And at one point I thought, okay, I can't outrun a bear. I can't outclimb this bear. I don't know if I can outswim the bear. So that's going to be my option. So the lake was right in front of me and I would have jumped in the lake, but you know.
You can outrun your dad.
Yeah.
Didn't you have a car?
Not where I was at. I mean, the car was up with the camper. The bear was between me and my car at the moment. And he pinned us. He trapped us. I was trapped between that bear and the lake for like 15 minutes. It's okay. It was fine. There was only kind of one point in the whole thing where I thought I was going to, yeah. And then the next day, my father and I came out with that same lens and posed on the same stump for a size comparison from the same position or as close as we could get to the same position.
Yeah.
Okay. You guys got any questions so far? Oh, so by the way, of course, the main one around here, though, brown bears is not as big of a worry, but certainly mountain lions.
Yeah.
It really helps if you're in a place which a lot of places you'd want to be around here for doing astrophotography are going to be out in the wild a bit. It helps to have a buddy to be with, really. But I don't obey my own advice there on that. Okay, so as far as taking still pictures that don't include the central band of the Milky Way, this was an image that I took one of the, within a year of getting my camera. I already had the lens that I'm using that I used quite a bit. I thought this was kind of a neat, I love this picture of Shasta. I think it's so beautiful. And you have Andromeda Galaxy up here, which is kind of fun to be able to get as well. So it's not the Milky Way, but it's not the central band of the Milky Way, but you get Andromeda as well. I say not featuring the central Milky Way because all the stars in this picture, of course, are stars of the Milky Way. It's just not quote unquote a Milky Way shot. I re-edited some of those pictures later and came up with that one, that version of it. Maybe again, it looks more blown out on the screen than it does on my screen. So yeah. I went up to Mount Shasta to Lake Siskiyou, and this January of last year, and the lake was completely frozen over. It was like 10 degrees Fahrenheit out there, but the camera was able to work. And so that was, I loved the light, a little bit of light here. Remember what I said a little bit ago, light pollution isn't all that bad if it's way off in the distance. It can kind of give a little character to your picture. So that's kind of fun. The cloud, the fog wasn't too bad for that shot. Again, another one of Mount Shasta. This one, again, but this is really a lot more blown out than it is on my screen. But, just a star shot. From looking at Mount Shasta from kind of this east by southeast. This is at the Mount Shasta City exit, one of the Mount Shasta City exits. There's a landfill right in front of me. You can't see. This is at Bryce Canyon. I didn't get to do much astrophotography on that trip because I got sick and it like wiped out the best nights. This is back also when I was using my D5200. So you notice the noise, the image is quite noisy and maybe could have been focused a little bit better, but Bryce Canyon would be a great place to do astrophotography. I want to get back down to Southwest again. Here we have Castle Crags. Again, another just kind of like general shot of, and then so again, here's the image as before, like when I edited it back in the day, and then I re-edited it recently, and again, I think it kind of pops a little bit more now with I've got new editing skills that's grown a little bit. Same kind of deal. This is taken from Shasta View Drive in the fall. And then so here's the image as it was, and then kind of maybe a little bit better maybe now. with new editing skills. Basically, I've learned to use the curves adjustment. Is really the main thing. It can, you know, if you're going to take a picture that it doesn't include the Milky Way or anything otherwise generally interesting, it's helpful to have a nice something in the foreground. So I hiked up to this Hadget Creek Falls. It's a beautiful place to swim as well and take your family. And this is the only time I've ever been to that place where there were no pot smokers. I was the only one there, but anyway. This picture again was back with my old camera, and it's incredibly noisy. It's really almost unusable, but I was actually able to edit it. Let's see, did it change? Oh yeah, and I have a time lapse I could show you a little bit later from here.
Which falls was that, Trent?
It's called well, it goes by two different names. Some people call it Lion Slide Falls, and some people call it Hadget Creek Falls. It's in Montgomery, or near Montgomery Creek. If you go just past Montgomery Creek, you'll see a turnoff to the left for a Big Bend Road. You take Big Bend Road until it curves really sharply, and there's a parking lot at the end of that curve, kind of in the middle of that curve, and there's a trail that goes right back to it. It's a beautiful place. Now, so that's like all this like still shots without the Milky Way. Now, what I really love, of course, this time of year is to get Milky Way shots. And what I really love is to have something really interesting in the foreground, which this picture doesn't quite have, but it did turn out really nicely of the Milky Way. And I have a really beautiful time lapse here. I think I'm going to shut this down, and I'll go ahead and show you that time lapse. This is probably the best, if I can get out here, the best astrophoto time lapse I've ever done. Let me pull that up. Hope I'm not going too long here. Okay, let's see. Just here we go.
Now, what settings were that to get the time?
Right. So what those are, well, a lot of my friends think that a lot of my family thought these are like shooting stars, but when you consider that each frame of this shot is like 20 seconds or so, then you realize they can't be shooting stars that you're seeing zipping across the sky. Those are like planes and satellites that are zipping across the sky is what you're seeing. Now, as far as what settings I was using on that one, well, I'll tell you because it's right here. 15 seconds, ISO 2000. I probably edited it in Lightroom afterwards and synced all the edits. Huh?
It was 15 intervals then?
No, each frame was 15 seconds.
Yeah. Right.
And there was probably just a second or two in between each shot. So I just, whenever you do time lapses.
Sounds like hours.
Yes, absolutely. It takes a long time because in order to get a time lapse of that length, you have to have hundreds of pictures. And that's even to do it at kind of the slowest acceptable frame rate of 20 frames per second. Really, you want to be 30 frames a second for a good time lapse. But I find if 20 seconds is minimally acceptable, so I'll go with that, and it allows me to stretch it out a little bit more. But even at that, you have to have hundreds of pictures just to get 6 seconds worth of 120 pictures for 6 seconds worth of video. So that means what I did is I set my camera up in this location, and I went and scouted another location while the camera was just shooting in the middle of the night.
You said
This is from the east of Mount Shasta. What I did is I drove out Highway 89 there at Mount Shasta exit, like I was going to McLeod, and there's a way to turn off the road to the left, and I can't remember the name of that road right off the top of my head, but I drove out that way a little ways, like I was going to Military Pass Road. Matter of fact, I ended up on Military Pass Road that night to go. Anyway.
You said 20 frames per second.
Yes.
So 20 frames per second, not per minute.
Per second, 20 frames per second. No, on the video, it's 20 frames per second.
Oh.
And while I'm shooting, it's essentially 15 seconds a frame, or approximately 4 shots a minute. Right? Yeah, approximately 4 per minute. Because you have to have a little bit of break in between. Okay. So time lapses can be fun, but they take forever to do. Yeah, I mean, I think SD cards these days, mine is 64 gigabytes. I never even think about filling it up. Matter of fact, I usually don't clear it off quickly enough. So what I like generally with my Milky Way shots to have something interesting in the foreground. This one didn't have that. This one didn't either, so I put something interesting in the foreground, which I recently got this little photo orb. And I thought I had this one labeled. This is actually a stacked image. It's focus stacked. So the Milky Way is at one focal depth. This part of it's at one focal depth, and this I had to switch to different focus to get to without changing anything else about the camera, but just like where it was focused at.
What do you use to stack?
Great. So it's really what I did for this one. I didn't do anything fancy. I just took the two images. They were already aligned as well as I needed them to be because they were just taken from the same tripod. All I did was adjust the focus. And then I literally just opened them up as two different layers, one on top of the other, and literally just erased the image. So this layer, the layer that has this part of it is on the bottom, and I literally just erased this image for just the part that included the orb. Yeah, and well, actually, I'm using. I quit Photoshop. I'm using Affinity Photo now.
How do you like it?
Huh?
How do you like it?
I don't like it as well in some key ways, actually. But
You don't lose Lightroom?
Huh?
You don't use Lightroom?
I quit using Lightroom because I wanted to try an experiment to see if I could get away without renting my software. I could own my software and not pay monthly.
Yeah.
And you know what? I may eventually go back to Adobe because there are things that I really like better about it. Like, if you want, I could show you some editing stuff in Affinity. But if you, oh yeah, I'll move on. I really need to move on. But point is, it really grays things out too much. And so there's there's Mars over here. So Mars is really close to Earth right now. And notice this was just taken last month before the fire started. Trees can be a useful thing to put in the foreground if they're done right. This one, notice, is taken in November, and so in order to get the Milky Way to show up like it did, I had to do some heavy editing, so heavy post-processing to make that show up. But it turned out to is a very successful image, except for if you print it, it doesn't look very good at all because when you print it, the difference in darkness between the tree and the background isn't as much. But when it's projected or shown on a screen, that one can look really nice. Some other interesting things you can put in the foreground, and this one was very unfortunate. Here is the Milky Way. I promise it's there. The only night that I could be at the racetrack in Death Valley National Park was this night where the moon was really bright and was blowing out the sky. I just can't do anything good with this image, but it is what it is. So there's my image of the racetrack, which, if you don't know, is a place where the rocks move by themselves. This trail that you see behind the rock, that's a natural phenomenon that's occurring by itself. Same thing with this one, that rock in the Milky Way. Yeah, they actually know why it is now, but I won't talk about it because I don't have time right now.
I was just going to ask.
Yeah, it's a fascinating place to go, actually. So there's Milky Way shots at the racetrack. This one was at Crater Lake. So another interesting thing you can do with the Milky Way is to have it reflected in a lake or something like that. This one wasn't all that successful of an image. I like the Milky Way, but it's not my favorite. My students liked it quite a lot. A couple of them bought copies of this from me. This one a little bit more successful. This was at Lassen, and so this is at Summit Lake, looking toward Lassen Peak, but I can't really tell that much. That one reflected really nicely anyway. Another great thing you can put, and to me, the number one most important or most interesting thing around here you can put with the Milky Way is put a mountain with it. This one, I couldn't get around to a place where this was taken the same night as that time lapse. Remember I said I went out and scouted a new location? This was the location I found. And then I came back, I got my camera and took it over here just in time. The moon was right, or the sun was about to rise, so that's why the sky is blown out quite strongly there. And so it's not, the Milky Way doesn't show up quite as well as I'd like, but it's the best I could do. You can put a mountain with the Milky Way. This is little bit, this is more successful image at Mount Bachelor in Oregon, just taken recently. Actually, it says June 2018, but I know that was July. That was 4th of July, actually. Same day. I don't know why it says June, but it was July 2018. Mount Bachelor again. And then this is Mount Lassen, erupting the Milky Way, which I really love. Got a little bit of a moon lighting up that landscape, so enjoy taking those kind of shots. The moon lighting up Mount Shasta. This is from the rest stop area, right? With a really wide angle lens, this is what it looks like. Notice it's at 16 millimeters on a crop sensor camera. So that would be the equivalent of about a 24 millimeter on a full frame. And then with the 35 millimeter, this is with the Nikon 35 millimeter f1.8. Getting everything in focus with this one is really tough because there's no markings on the lens at all. You have to have to just hunt around until you find the focus with it, but it can give you really nice images. And then probably my favorite image recently with the Milky Way is the one with Broke Off Mountain, the Milky Way that I took last year. This is a wide angle the same night. I actually have a time lapse of that as well. It's a little more flicker, and this is still my favorite image of all time that I've ever taken somehow. The mountain, trees, and a car drove across the road and lit up the trees over here, and it reflected in the perfectly still lake. This shot, I love it. You get the reflection of the Milky Way in the water. I was so lucky to get that image, and I'm so happy about it. So, okay, that's the end of that one. Let me exit. I know we're running short on time. I did have another one to show you the other kinds of astrophotography. I'll zip through those pictures if I can. Where's my part 2? So taking star trails, this was one of the first star trails images. Matter of fact, this was one of the first times I got out. This is at the Parkville Cemetery near southeast of Reading. And I was actually doing that. I edited this photo for star trails later because I was actually taking this one for a time lapse too. But so that's the nice thing about time lapses is that if you're doing if you don't have the Milky Way in the picture, you can take your time lapse images and turn them into star trails pictures if you stack them. So this is like 64 images stacked together in Photoshop. But notice they're 20 seconds a piece instead of what I'll show you later.
20 seconds, 60 pictures. So,
Yeah. So there was,
3.5.
Yep. I was out there. This is not a sport for people who don't mind being out late at night. Again, it's like 1 second, or 1 or 2 seconds, just a very short.
20 seconds, one off.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. Because if you're gonna do a time lapse, any of that time in between shots is just wasted time. Because you remember, notice you have to do. Those 64 images. It's like 2 hours or over 2 hours to take that. This one was not a stacked image. This is like just a long exposure. If you notice, it's almost 3 minutes of exposure. This was one of the very first actual pure star trails pictures I did. This also is one that my students just love that image, even though I edited it later. I learned how to edit better, and this is what I've got now, which I like quite a bit better. So re-editing your pictures can be cool. This is another one of those that I did for a time lapse. I have a time lapse of this that I could show you. This is at Castle Crags, looking north towards Castle Crags, obviously looking north because there's the North Star up there. Whenever you put the North Star in the frame, then you get that swirl, which I really love. So notice it's 55 photos, 20 seconds a piece with about a second in between, 20-second exposures. If you zoom in on that, you can actually see the breaks between. That's how I counted how many photos were there. Is I went over to those longer trails and actually counted the gaps in between them, because you can see it if you zoom in. Now,
Why are some of the trails blue and some are yellow?
Great question, because the stars are different colors. The stars are absolutely different colors. Some are red, some are blue, some are yellow. Absolutely.
Depends on the age of the stars.
Yeah, that's true. And the size and all that. This now, by the time I got to this one, which was one of my first, like, I'm really kind of learning how to do star trails pictures. This is again my D7200. Now I'm doing it 2-minute exposures. If you notice, 120 seconds a piece. Now you don't have to do as many exposures. It's not. I'm not trying to do star trail or not trying to do time lapses anymore here. I'm doing pure star trails, and this can be really nice. So I've kind of honed. This was me kind of coming to a point where I was honing in on what I wanted to do with it, and then now by this picture, I'm really starting to get to. These are the settings that I'm going to be using for star trails. So what I do these days is 3-minute exposures, 1 second gap in between, ISO anywhere between 400 and 800. 800's fine most nights, unless the moon is out really bright and blowing out the sky. And F, anywhere from 6.3 to 8. I usually, a lot of times I go F8 these days. If I went F8, then I would be up higher ISO. And then this is one of the most, this became, now really kind of dialing in a little bit more on star trails. This is kind of from the same location. This is from the road toward Mount Shasta Ski Park. This was in August, and then here I came back in December and took that one.
So that's about a little under 2 hours.
Yeah, it's about.
So shaved off about an hour to an hour and a half on your time.
And then Mount Shasta from the east by northeast, maybe it's northeast, I guess. Shastina is kind of like right in the line of sight with Mount Shasta there, so you can kind of get this sense of where you're at. And this one's, I love this one so much more, though. To me, it's a much more interesting image, looking kind of shooting from the east by southeast, with the moon lighting up the landscape on that. And again, when you get that far away from this North Star, here that's 12 photos. You notice it didn't take nearly as long to get this one. So this is like, like half an hour to 45 minutes of star movement to take that one. Because the further away you get from the North Star, the longer the trails are, right?
Oh.
Right. The stars seem to move faster the farther away you get from the North Star.
The star was up.
Yeah, it'd be up in the North Star isn't even in the frame here, but if you wanted to find it, it would be up to them. This was kind of a fun one I did in Red Bluff on the river. There's a little campground there, and this tree hangs right down, but almost touches the river, but not quite. And what I did here is I stacked these, but before I rendered the stack, I went and adjusted the opacity of each of the layers walking back, so that the first image that I took, which would have been the star trails that are like right here of this trail, it was at a very lower opacity. And then each image in the stack gets higher and higher in opacity until you get to the last one, which is at full 100% opacity. Then you render the stack, and you get this effect that you can actually kind of see the motion, kind of get a sense of the motion of the stars.
So you get more of like a comment with the tree.
Yeah.
And the funny thing is, I don't know all the technical stuff, but I would have thought that the stars were going the opposite direction, not starting from the bottom going up.
Yeah. Well, you know how the sun rises in the east and sets in the west, so I'm looking east here.
Huh.
So right, you get the. It's not all steps forward. I don't really care as much for this image because I wish I had centered things a little differently and maybe balanced it more. But this is in the Sierras at Alabama Hills, and this is the full image of that same shot. Basically, that first one was cropped, and this is the full image. This is Orion actually that's streaking through. And then this is another fun one of, I really like this image a lot because it's this was my Star Trails image at Death Valley at the racetrack. So here's one of the rocks that's moving. You can see kind of faintly, and again, it's more blown out on the screen than it is on my screen. The trail, and it kind of looks like that one of the stars spun out, and there's the rock that became with that. I don't know. I kind of like it. I wanted that shot so bad, and the clouds were terrible that night. I just set my camera up and I just let it shoot, and I went to sleep. And I figured, look, if the cloud's clear, then I'll get something useful. If not, then I won't get anything useful. And I got enough useful shots without too many clouds to give me that much motion. But the other thing is the moon was incredibly bright that night and completely blowing everything out. So it was tough to do. And then this is my most successful shot lately, probably my best star trails picture ever, I think, with South Sister. This is in Oregon. This is Sparks Lake and Broken Top Mountain over here. And you can tell it's about not quite an hour and a half worth of star movement. Yeah. Yeah, this is the, oh, and this is the D750 with that Tokina lens. This was the first time that I realized that that lens would work on this camera, at least at 16 millimeters. Yeah. 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 All right, real quick. Special events in astrophotography: meteor showers, comets, lunar eclipses, and solar eclipses. And that's in order from, oh, I don't have any problem, you know, I've got days to take this, it's going to peak, but I've got lots of time, to, I've got to shoot just in a minute and a half or whatever you got, you know, down with solar eclipses. So I have not done much with meteor showers. Here's one image that I took, and most of the streaks on this image are meteors. But what I did is I took a bunch of images from the same location and I stacked them, and all I did was just bring in the meteors. So it's not really even an authentic image. And two of these aren't even meteors. This is a plane or a satellite, and so is this one over here. But what's kind of cool is there was one that went right through Andromeda Galaxy up here, which is kind of cool. I have not done a whole lot with meteors. I won't have a lot to show here. Back to Milky Way just for a second, but this was taken the same night as that one, and there is a meteor that streaks right through here, which was kind of cool. Another fun thing is comets. For this, it's helpful if you have that's like a polar tracker of some sort of equatorial mount to keep the camera moving with things, so you can take longer exposures. This was a 3-second exposure. But the one thing I have learned in astrophotography is, I mean, it's intuitive, but you don't think about it. The stars, well, really, the Earth is never still. I know that's obvious, right? But what I'm saying is, this is a 3-second exposure. If I had done that with my wide-angle lens, you could not see star trailing unless you went way in. But with this one, you can actually see star trailing at 3 seconds. Okay, you can see a little bit of streaking of the stars because I'm zoomed in at 270 millimeters on a crop sensor camera, right? So the Earth is never still, and you always have to deal with a little bit of star trailing unless you're on an equatorial mount or something like that. If you're interested in comets, the cometchasing.skyhound.com gives you lots of information. There's one right now. This guy right here may be interesting to look at if you could, and maybe take pictures of if we weren't covered up in smoke, or if you want to drive somewhere. And this from this website you can get information about where is the comet going to be at each date and all that sort of stuff, and when is it going to be brighter or whatever. And then if you're they will give you that information in terms of magnitudes. So it's helpful to understand a little bit about magnitudes if you want to understand this. That the lower the number, the brighter the object. So the full moon is at -11. The lowest you can see with the naked eye is 6. Anything a higher number than that, you can't see with the naked eye. You're going to need binoculars or a telescope or something like that. But the camera, as you know, the cameras can see things that with our eyes can't, because they can expose for long periods of time. So you can still, take pictures of comets. Another fun one is lunar eclipses. Oh, wait a minute, that's not a lunar eclipse. That's shot through the smoke. I'm sorry. It just looks like.
It looked like that one.
Yeah, it was. That was just shot the other night. What's interesting is that picture was taken like within 24 hours of a lunar eclipse. But it's just that lunar eclipse was happening over Europe and not here. So I got my sneak peek of the lunar eclipse before they did. I just had to look through smoke to get it. My first lunar eclipse shot was this one. I took it from Simpson University. This was with my Tamron, zoomed all the way in as far as I get it. This is the cross at Simpson there. And then more recently, there was one in January, and I went out and went to the courthouse at Auburn to take some pictures there. And it's really great to have something interesting in the foreground. If you do that, you're probably going to need to focus stack it. This one turned out okay even without focus stacking. This one's kind of a fun one. The flag doesn't sit still, but at least you can tell what it is. And it's a pretty sharp image of the moon. This was kind of fun in the courthouse, kind of as the moon was coming out of the full phase into partial, back into the partial phase of the lunar eclipse. This was still fully eclipsed, but it was about to come out. And this is also focus stacked. So I've got one that's focused on the moon, and then all the rest of this image is just kind of focused toward, kind of more shallower focus to get the trees a little bit, and then especially the stonework here of this arch that was at that courthouse. That's a kind of a cool one. You can get right up on something kind of fun. But that image is not focus stacked, and so if you zoom in on it, it's not really all that great. But this one was focus stacked, and so you get kind of like a nice view of the face of the statue and the moon in sharp focus as well. Okay, and the last one, my last topic, and I'll get out of your hair, is solar eclipses. So this is taken zoomed in pretty good on the solar eclipse, on the partial phase of the solar eclipse with the solar filter. I brought the solar filter that I had for my other camera tonight in case anyone wants to see it. This one right before it went out of into totality, just before totality. And then at totality, you take off the solar filter and now you shoot in aperture priority mode. And so you get, kind of nice diamond ring effect. And then the full totality without the diamond ring. And then the diamond ring coming out on the other side of totality. And then I might have those backwards, but then kind of the partial phase going out. But the one that I wanted wasn't the one that was zoomed in, because I remember I'm landscape astrophotography. I wanted to show my viewer what did this look like in the context of where I am. And so this is at Smith Rock, Oregon, where I was at. And I set up my camera and I didn't move it. And I just let it take a bunch of pictures. Well, I was triggering it at first, but then at the end I realized that it would be better if I had it set to just take a picture every 5 minutes. If that was one thing I was going to do, I would do differently about this image, about what I did, would be to have it do those 5-minute intervals from the very beginning instead of more haphazard, because what you see is like, look, these are not evenly spaced, whereas these are, and I wish it was evenly spaced all the way throughout. But I just didn't move the camera, so 27 of the photos that made these up with the orange partial phases are done with the solar filter on at these settings. And then when totality hit, I switched to aperture priority mode and took a couple of shots, a few shots in, and then stacked those. So this one of the sun is 0.77 seconds, and this one of the landscape, or the part of it that's the landscape, was at 13 seconds. And so I just kind of blended those together in Photoshop to make one image. Right. And I think that's it.
Okay, that was interesting. You have me a late night owl.
Yeah.
And so you're just briefly, you were using Photoshop stacking, and now you're using another program stacking.
And that last Star Trails, the one with the 2 mountains and the lake, that was done in Affinity. So it does stacking really well.
All right.
Actually, it's easier to stack in Affinity than it is in Photoshop, frankly.
Okay, so we got a break. Trent's going to judge, and the snacks were